But I made a note of myself because after last week, I had 3 or 4 very cute stories that I just thought I would share with you, simply because it's dealing with a period that's not that long ago. Diane Hawk, Mrs. Hawko, I saw it here somewhere before, told me, remember we talked about Truman and how his store went broke? Turns out her uncle bought the store from Truman and made it a going concern. He became very wealthy with it. So you see, the problem was Eddie Jacobson was on the road buying, this is really true, and Truman ran the store. If it would have been the other way around, maybe they would have made something out of it. Someone else, I don't remember exactly who, from Cleveland, she told me that her father always used to go, he was an Orthodox Jew, but he always loved to hear Abba Hill Silver speak. And it's a little bit like some of us may remember, a little before my time. Do you remember the Jews in Borough Park, and the old thing used to go, they would daven in the morning, Ashkam Minyan, and they'll go hear Kusavitsky or some other big chazonim in the conservative shuls anyway, because they want to hear real chazonis. This guy obviously wanted to hear Abba Hill Silver speak. But she said like this, it never was really, wasn't a shaila about Machal Shabbos, because they never had services on Saturday, it was always on Sunday. So it's nothing to worry about. Mike Kidorf, Aviva Kidorf's father was here last week from Hamilton, Ontario. And he was telling me he was a next door neighbor of Ivan Rand, who was the head of the Canadian Supreme Court, who wrote the UNSCOP report. The guy who made the partition. Who drafted the report, a very famous Canadian figure over here, and so talk about small world. And then there's one coming a little bit later on, which I'll share with you from the Krugers. So now, with all those preliminaries aside, let's get down to work. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight. I'll try to see if I can read all this, but let's go to our map. Okay, here we go. This was what you see over here. This is the map of what Israel is supposed to be, meaning this was what the United Nations, after all those fighting and all the trouble that we talked about last week, and they finally got the vote in, this was what Israel was supposed to be. A piece of the Negev, a piece of this, and a piece of that. As you see, this map does not reflect military or geographical contiguity. They don't even touch. It's strictly ethnographic considerations. The reason they wrote the map is, and this is the best deal that they could get, is this is the area where Jews lived. So there are no Jews at all living here at that time, leaving Jerusalem out, but no Jews over here, hardly. There are no Jews in the Gaza Strip and places like that. So that's going to be assigned to the Arabs. The areas that you see over here, by the most generous reconstruction, and this was the most generous reconstruction that could come out, was the areas of Jewish settlements, okay? From a military point of view, this is indefensible. Would you agree? They don't even touch each other, right? So it's not, if the Arabs would get their act together, they can take them down. Moreover, this area itself, I'm talking about the Israel part that I'm pointing to over here, is by no means not all Jewish. There were 650,000 Jews, 400,000 Arabs. Give you an example of what I'm talking about. Tel Aviv is a big Jewish city? Yeah. Next door was Haifa, 80,000 Arabs. Jaffa, that's right, 80,000 Arabs, right? And so forth. Now, if they were smart, and the intelligent Palestinians today, among themselves, bemoaned this, they said, we're so stupid, if we just would have accepted this in 47, take the deal as it is, there would be no Israel today. You understand what I'm saying? Because just demographically, as well as other ways, Abu Mazen said this actually the other day in an interview somewhere. He said, just because he made a mistake once, we shouldn't be suffering for 60 years, but he recognized it was a mistake. And so what I'm trying to tell you is that the Jews were given a deal which really was untenable. But it was the best possible deal available, and it was the only one available after 2,000 years, and the Jews were in no position to protest, and therefore they said, we'll take it. Holding nose, they'll take it. Nobody knew what will happen, but they said, if this is the deal on the table, take it. Again, I repeat, if they had 650,000 Jews and 400,000 Arabs, even if they would double and triple it with Aliyah, which eventually they did, so you'd have something like 2 million Jews, but you understand, 400,000 Arabs today, 800,000 Arabs the next day, eventually it's, not to be funny, over a course of time, and then they outnumber us. That's all I'm trying to say. In the end, by the time the war's over, 150,000 Arabs. And even that today, as you know, is unfortunately a demographic time bomb, and I'm referring to Arabs who are citizens of Israel. I'm not talking about, so to speak, in the occupied territories in Judea and Samaria and all those places, right? I'm talking about who are within the Green Line. And so this was a crazy deal, which is why Ben-Gurion said take it, and they took it. Weizmann said take it, and they took it. The others said take it. But there were significant numbers of Jews in Palestine who very strongly opposed this idea, the partition map. They said we're never going to recognize it. As we'll see in a minute, some of them were in the extreme right and some in the extreme left. It's kind of strange bedfellows where you had, on the one hand, Menachem Begin and the Irgun, who say, as I'm sure you know, Shtei Gadol L'Yadin. They're supposed to be, first of all this plus Jordan. And then you had the Stern Gang. They were totally off the wall. They wanted this. Okay? That's where that's where they were holding. Wait a second. On the other hand, you have on the left the Shomer Tzair, right, which later become the Mapam. They want all of Palestine, but as a binational state. In other words, they view the carving of the baby, as they call it, like in Solomon's case, King Shlomo, the carving of the baby to be the worst possible thing. Keep the integrity of whole Eretz Yisrael and just have a binational state, which is also crazy, considering that the leaders of the Palestinians, at that particular moment, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, So it's really a case where reality faces ideals, but by no means is it going to be a done deal. People like the Irgun and others will continue to fight very bitterly over this, and sometimes fight other Jews over this, over the course of the next year and a half. It's going to be one of the problems that Jews have to deal with. Let's go to the next one. Here you have the extreme right, Begin, the leader of the Irgun at that time. Here you have the extreme left. This is Tabenkin, father and son, all the big shots in the Mapam. He was one of the big commanders in the Palmach. The Palmach, as we'll see over here, is a left-wing Zionist thing, meaning that they're mainly composed from the kibbutzim and places like that. They did the fighting, but he wants, as I said before, one Palestine should be a binational state. They think Ben-Gurion has done a terrible thing by agreeing to a split. Furthermore, by the way, this guy, very typical story, grew up in Belarus, I think, went to yeshiva, then moved to Israel, totally broke with that, and ended up becoming the founder of the Shomer Tzair. Unfortunately, we know the good Lord did not choose to put Israel in the middle of the ocean, but rather in the Middle East. And that means it's stuck in the middle of the Arab world. So that means that a major factor, what's going to happen in 1947, 48, 49, down till today, is we do not live in an island, but surrounded by the Arabs. What is the Arab world in the period I'm talking about, 1945, 46, 47? It's not identical with today. There were 6 states. You understand? Most of the Arabs, this is a good thing for Israel, most of the Arabs at that time were still not independent. They were colonies ruled by England and France. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. There's no Morocco, there's no Algeria, there's no Tunisia in those days, all part of French colonies. Libya is a British colony. Aden, Southern Arabia, what we call today the Kuwait and the Gulf states, all British colonies, you see? So that means they're not in the Parsha, so to speak. But there were 6 countries that were independent. It was Syria and Egypt and Lebanon and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Yemen. So these are 6 countries, which the British put together in something called the Arab League in 1945 for Cold War purposes. They wanted to organize in such a way that they'll help the British against Russia. The idea being like this: King Farouk doesn't want communism. King Abdullah doesn't want communism. They want to maintain the status quo, and therefore they'll be on our side. These are the countries Israel will fight in 1948 when they invade, because there is no Morocco, as I said before. There is no Libya or something like that. So it's a somewhat restricted Arab world. And I might also say, fortunately, they were very far from getting their act together politically or militarily. As a matter of fact, other than Egypt, these countries that you look over here, although you don't know it unless you're a real specialist, you can't tell by the stupid superficial journalism you read all the time, they're cholents. They're hodgepodges. We know this now about Iraq because the American army invaded there and is stuck there for now years, and all of a sudden they found out it's not one country, it's 3 and maybe 13. You got the Kurds in the north, the Shiites in the south. You know this. Any intelligent person knows. The Sunnis in the middle, and even the Sunnis have different clans and groups over there. And what looked like a country isn't a country. We are now finding, if you're intelligent, what I mean by that is if you follow the news at a more than superficial level, which most don't, or if you have any background in the Middle East, which definitely most people don't, you'll then know, here, go to the next one. That's Syria. You understand? There's no Syria. It's a made-up thing. These are the French made different countries and put it together. At the end, they decided, we'll take Lebanon and this part, the Alawites, and make it a country called Lebanon. And so this is what you call, this is Sunni. This is Assad's base. This is what the Alawites. There's a certain group there like the Shiites a little bit. They follow Ali. That's what the Alawites. You get it? You never even heard of it. This group over here is the Druze. They've always wanted to be part of Jordan. You understand? This is, it's a cauldron. This one wants to shech this one. I'm serious. That's not a joke on my part. This one wants to shech this one. Believe you me, what's going on, for example, as we speak in the so-called Arab Spring in Syria is really the old thing that they know about, which is one group wants to shech the other ones. Assad knows the minute he lets go for a second, he and all the Alawites will be slaughtered by the Sunnis, and they say so. Now, the world doesn't do it the way they say it's the Arab Spring. It's a desire of the democratic institutions to assert themselves. That's all baloney, right? In reality, you have ancient ethnic kinds of things, which trump contemporary Western sorts of attempts to classify them, because in the Western understanding, this kind of hatred that goes on forever, ever, is sort of like indescribable. It's unknown, but it is part of the world over there. So when we talk about Syria and all this, which Syria are you talking about? You understand? I can tell you, when Israel became a state, there was a guy, Reuben Shiloach, who was the head of the Mossad at that time, and he said to Ben-Gurion, let's start a civil war here, let them all shecht each other, they'll leave us alone. You understand? At that time. And they didn't do it, but it was on the table, and the reason on the table is anybody who really knows what's going on in Syria, not just a map of white or black or green, knows that it's a cauldron. And the same thing true, by the way, is Saudi Arabia. They may be all Arabs, but there's gigantic Shiite minorities over there that the Saudi princes are terrified of, and the Shiite groups have been suppressed by them for centuries. And it's not only the Wahhabists, there's plenty of the ones who would, A would like to shech B, and B would like to shech A, and they may succeed one day, for all we know. You understand? Lebanon, I don't have to tell you. You know that Lebanon is a cauldron of one group against the others. The Maronites, the Shiites, whatever you want, the different groups that are popping around over there. And so on and so forth. Egypt is the only country. It's not like that even Egypt has the Coptics, but Egypt is different. They're pretty homogeneous. So this is the group that Israel has to face in 47, 48. And it's a group that's having trouble getting its own national identity together and organizing itself correctly. But at least they all are agreed, let's kill the Jews. Now, what really the situation at that time was that these countries were mixtures of a kind of corrupt parliamentarianism and a straightforward authoritarianism. For example, in Saudi Arabia, it was a total dictatorship, obviously, King Saud. Anybody that blinked, they chopped their head off. But Egypt and Lebanon and Syria, for example, and to a degree, Jordan and Iraq had parliaments, and they really tried to make a go of it. A lot of corruption over there, but that's what goes along with democracy. Maryland's an exception, but But this is what happened. And it's also true that these countries are all afraid, as we know today, even superficial people know, as we know today, it's their government, and then there's the Arab street. All right? Because the volatile nature of the Middle Eastern character is such that whereas in Baltimore, if a guy gets up and says, let's storm City Hall and all the rest of it, people keep walking by on Pratt Street, You have guys say this all the time. In an Arab country, if a guy says, let's storm the palace, they get together and they do it. So it's you have that. So if they say like this, you're a traitor, you're befriending the Jews, you're insufficiently hostile to Israel, you're doing this, that, and the other, you're a tool of the foreign, you better watch out. You understand? Believe me, every 15 minutes, if you follow Jordanian news, the king of Jordan has to change the government simply because the street is all on fire and they are angry at this particular politician and throw him to the wolves. So this is the way, this is the neighborhood that Israel chose to locate itself. Right? Now, a real estate agent might advise differently, but this is where we are, where we ended up. Now, prior to 1945, right? Prior to this, it's really interesting that the Palestine issue was not really felt by the masses. First of all, they didn't have the modern, CNN and all that, obviously, Al Jazeera. And second of all, the great majority of the masses at those years before 1945 are illiterate. And third of all, they're very local. They're worried about, taking care of, just putting bread on the table, as they say. It's also true, by the way, that the white paper that was issued by the British, which cut off the immigration, actually lulled the Arab masses to sleep. They said, okay, so there's not going to be a Jewish state, showing that that's the end of that. We have other things to worry about. In a weird way, that was good for the Jews, because they didn't agitate against Zionism, against the Jews, during the years 39 to 45. But it's going to happen, though. Even for the elites, the educated ones, in the years I'm talking about of the Second World War, they're mainly concentrating on getting their own national identity together. They want to kick the British out, make their own independent states. They have their own issues. The Jews are not a main issue for them during this period, which is, good, so to speak, for us. I might say that Egypt, it's very interesting if you study Egypt, in the 20th century, had a huge machlokas, a huge debate within its own elites for a long time, should they even be part of the Arab world? Egypt was the most westernized of the Arab countries for a variety of reasons, and the Egyptian elites really wanted to be Europeanized, and they, of course, were Muslims, and they spoke Arabic, but in spite of that, they looked down upon all the others as distinctly inferior, and there was a strain of Egyptian intellectuals and politicians either who said, don't pay attention to Palestine, all that other kind of junk, that's Arab business, it's not our problem. Egypt should concentrate on becoming the France or the United States of the Middle East, which would not have been a dumb idea from their narrow point of view. It's a matter of consciousness racing, it's a matter of what you feel. That's why, all during the period I'm talking about, down to 1945, 46, 47, there were active Zionist groups in Egypt and Iraq. They had parades, they had clubs, they had a Bnei Akiva there, they had Hashem Tzair. It's really interesting. Ben Gurion used to go all the time to Cairo and other people to visit this. And it's not like, they got mobbed and attacked by crazy Arabs on the street or something like that. Nothing. Because it was a period where things were low. Obviously, later on, this would change. In addition to all this, among the states, the Arabic states, the 6 states, there was a keen competition for who should be the glorious Arab leader. They all wanted, the idea of being the foremost leader within the Arab world, because that's their culture. And therefore, they're competing, again, taking your mind off of what's going on in Israel and the Jews, all the rest of it. It's the jockeying for power, for example, between these two guys. There's a fat King Farouk, and there's King Hussein, Abdullah, visiting each other a number of times. Farouk is the king of Egypt. Naturally, he should be the number one, numero uno in the Arab world. King Abdullah is a descendant from Muhammad, which is true, and Hashemite family, and they used to be in Mecca. Naturally, he should be number one in the Arab world. And the same thing is true for the guy in charge of Iraq, and naturally Saudi Arabia knows that they're number one. And this is a lot of their politics, which is local turf wars, which is true even today. You understand? Maybe this is moderated by the fact that each of these Arab regimes has so much trouble within their own countries now, they ain't got the time to go and potchka with other peoples. But we all remember Nasser and the post-Nasser period when which country's trying to, overthrow the other one and things like that. So, in short, there was a lot of lip service during these years about Arab unity, but it wasn't real, thank God. Right? That's the way it was. There was no real achdus. This starts to change in 1946 with the Anglo-American Commission of Inquiry that we talked about, because the British and the Americans are 2 important countries, obviously, send this formal committee, and they start talking about a Jewish state. Now, if you've been with me this series, they never quite said do a Jewish state, but they did say bring in 100,000 Jews into Palestine. But the very fact that now there's talk about it, and Truman was already starting to make noises like maybe to be a Jew. For the first time ever in history, I don't know if it was the first time ever in history, but first time it was taken really, really seriously, it might maybe be a Jewish state. That already freaked out all the Arabs, and that woke everybody up, as you can understand, and then things start to change. You have to understand, the end of the World War II is a period in Arab history as well. And it's perfectly understandable. That's when they wanted to get rid of, and they did, all the European countries that ruled them. They want to get their own country and independence, all the rest of it. And as they see it, and this is very important if you're an Arab, which we're not, but I'm just telling you how they see it. If you see it, history is going this way. The British are going to get out of Egypt, then eventually out of Libya. The French are going to get out of North Africa. Sooner or later, the Arabs are going to be totally independent. Then they're going to organize their economies, and they'll build their education system and their infrastructure, and it's going to go on and on. and then all of a sudden in the middle of it, they're going to lose Arab land to the Jews. I mean, that's the wrong direction of history. You see? It's a bone in their throat till today. It will be a major theoretical problem for Arab thinkers, really, in their culture, not our culture, down till today, which is how do you explain Zionism unless you describe it like the Yetzer Hara, it's Satan or something. It's just supernatural, because it doesn't make sense. The 20th century was to go in this direction. So whoever heard that they should lose part of their land to the Jews of all people in that direction? It really is something bothersome to them. In June of 1946, therefore, when they're having all these conferences, for the first time the Arabs have a get-together of all the heads of state in Blue Dawn, which is like Las Vegas in Lebanon, and they have whole committees. We're not going to accept anything Jewish, and if there is, we'll declare war on them, and we're going to boycott anything Jewish. And a lot of our resolutions over there will form armies, but it's talk. They don't do it, thank God. In September of 47, that's a year later, when already the United Nations was debating the UNSCOP report. Now it's really, really, really on the table. There might actually be a Jewish state. They have what they call the SOFAR conference. One is Las Vegas, the other one is another similar type of place. And they're not going to go to a dump to have a conference. Anyway, the Arabs are shocked that the partition is really a possibility. And they're shocked also, which the Jews also were, you mean the British actually might pull out of Palestine? Everybody knew the British talked this way, they talked that way. But at the end of the day, they hold on to what they got. It was inconceivable almost to the Arabs that the British might pull away. And if they do, you mean we could actually go in and do what we want over there? Until now, the Arab countries have been occupied directly or indirectly by the British, and they have to dance to their tune. They are restricted interaction. You mean the British might go out and we can all go and attack the Jews? It just opens up vistas of possibilities to them that they never thought would actually take place. I might add that the Jews also, and Ben Gurion and the others, did not believe until April or so of 48, March, April 48, the British actually were pulling out. They said, there's got to be a trick here. The British are always very tricky. You and I know, with hindsight, that the British really were pulling out. But it was something that was a little bit incredible over there at that time. Finally, you have the very interesting piece of the puzzle, King Abdullah of Transjordan. Those who have been here in my other talks in the past may possibly recall when we talked about this in the First World War. If you remember, the British fought with the Jews, but they also fought with the Arabs against the Turks back in World War I. And they made promises right and left. And one of the promises they made was that they'll make Faisal, who was the brother of Abdullah, king of whole Arabia, what you would call today Jordan and Palestine and Syria and Lebanon and Iraq. Something along the lines of the map that I showed you before. But it would be one big Arab kingdom. And after all, it's all Arabic speaking, and so on and so forth. And Faisal was a nice guy, very moderate, and so forth in that way as well. Now, it didn't happen. It did not happen. And what happened was that whole family was kicked out of Saudi Arabia by the Saudis, who almost killed them. And the British, as a consolation prize, gave Faisal a country that they made up for him called Iraq. And for Abdullah, his brother, they made up a country called Jordan, Transjordan. Churchill very famously said, I invented Jordan with a whiskey instead of 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon in the Cairo hotel, which is true, because he was the colonial minister there visiting at that time, and they figured we got to do something for Abdullah, so they took away half of Israel and they gave it to him, the other side of the Jordan. Now, that doesn't mean, if you're Abdullah, that you ever gave up on the dream. You just put it in the refrigerator for 20 years or 25 years. And so now he says, the British might pull out. Maybe I can take over Palestine, and with that combined power, take over Syria, which after all is an internal contradiction, and many of the Syrians want me anyway, and then add Lebanon to it, and we'll have the old dream. Right? We'll have the old dream. And so he really wants a kingdom of Greater Arabia and be a single Arab state, which all the Arab nationalists have been saying to win. So I'm the man to do it. I had a small country with an army of 5,000 men. Don't worry about it. We'll get around that, okay? Now, obviously, if you buy into that dream, if you are that way, this is diametrically opposed to what we would call Palestinian nationalism. This is diametrically opposed to the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who wants nothing to do with that. He wants to have a Palestinian state, kill all the Jews, a Palestinian state, which never existed before, but he's the face of the new Palestinian nationalism. And by the way, it also is diametrically opposed to Syria as a country, because what I just said was that King Abdullah would say, give me a break. Syria is as artificial as Jordan is. Therefore, I'll take over the whole thing. And he had ambitions along these lines all through. When Israel finally becomes a state, he will negotiate with them that maybe have a joint war to knock out Syria and hand it to Syria, right? In exchange for Israel getting a few villages on the West Bank or something like that. This is how they're thinking over there. And it's a game. Right? It's the great game, as they call it, politics. But this is the neighborhood in which we have bought a house. What can I tell you? Now, that's why Abdullah will secretly negotiate, as I'm sure many people know, with Golda Meir as representative of the Sochnut. Moshe Sharett was the foreign minister, but when he wasn't there, Golda Meir took over when he was away out of the country. And it's really a revival of, I don't know if anybody recalls this, back in 1919, right after the First World War, Chaim Weizmann and Faisal got together in Eilat, Aqaba, one of those places over there, and they actually made a deal at that time in which Faisal said at that time, if I get the big state that I'm talking about, then I won't mind if the Jews have a little piece called Israel. You understand? Now, that was talk, we'll never know what would have happened, but that's the most we've ever heard from the Arabs. Get it? And Faisal was a very moderate type of guy. Abdullah said also, and he meant it, I'm a very moderate type guy also. I want to get along with the Jews, provided I get my part. Okay? And he was thinking very big. I don't know, maybe down the road he figured he'd get rid of Israel or something like that. But I don't think he was a bloodthirsty type of guy. He probably, seriously, if you study Abdullah, he wasn't that type. He figured like this, we'll make a big Arab state, and the Jews will be like a state of it, semi-independent or not. I'll treat them well, and that sort of business, which is not what Israel had in mind. We've been there and done that. Thank you very much. Finally, if I've complicated things beyond your understanding, I've succeeded. He says, finally, the Arab states on the one hand, those countries you mentioned, and the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, the leader of the Palestinians, severely do not trust each other, stamazoi, besides the Abdullah thing. Egypt, Syria, Iraq, they don't trust the Mufti and vice versa. And as a result, they sure as heck are not going to build an army for him. Because who knows what he'll do with it. And so what happens in the end is, you get two armies, which is good for Israel because it's not coordinated. The Mufti will form his own army, which he calls Al-Muqaddash, the Holy Army, the Sacred Army, of about 1,000 men, so that's nothing, under his relative Abdul Qadir al-Husseini, who I mentioned last week. He was the leader in the 1930s Intifada of the hit squads that used to go from village to village and torture people who didn't go along with fighting Jews. So that's real smart. You get a guy who in every village in Palestine is somebody who hates him, okay? But he also was very charismatic at the same time, and a lot of the villagers, especially in South Israel, the Arab villagers, will follow him through fire and water. So anyway, that's that. And also, he got another guy, Hassan, what was it again? Hassan Salameh, that's right. Yeah, there you go. This fellow over here is a real hilarious. It's him and the same one. And I'll tell you why I say that. I bet you nobody even knows what I'm about to tell you. Have you ever heard of Operation Atlas? In October of 1944, right? In October of 1944, when the war was on, listen to this. After D-Day and all that, when Germany's losing, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem persuaded Hitler to do the following. He said, you've never been able to get at the Jews in Palestine, which is the one causing me all the trouble. Let's send a couple of secret agents, German-trained Germans who were born in Palestine, and therefore they know the language. From Sarona, there used to be German colonies. They even called it the German colony. These are German. With a couple of my guys, like this fellow over here, right? Look at this. We'll land by parachute, and they do this, and we'll put poison in the water supply of Tel Aviv and wipe out the whole city. What you would call today a chemical warfare, German warfare. And Hitler said yes. And they flew the plane over, and they dropped them in Jericho. It was a whole plan. It wasn't it was a professional intelligence operation. It's called Operation Atlas. Those of you, I'm sure over here, surrounded by blackberries, you can see it later on if you want. And where'd he go? He was the Arab with him. Fortunately, they bungled the whole thing. He broke his leg when he landed with the parachute. And the Germans, one thing they didn't cop was that they took good money, gold coins, and they thought, in the Middle East, gold, that's very unusual. So as soon as they landed and they walked in an Arab village, people said, gold coins. And they heard about it all over the country. They told the police. And thank God they were arrested with the poison vials. And it never happened. But that's the Chachka we're talking about over here, who's going to lead the Arab forces against the Jews talk to me about the Geneva Convention. The reason I say this is because both sides, before we're done tonight, are going to play very rough. I say it again, both sides are going to play very rough. But there's a reason, there's a context. Okay? So he's the leader over here. He's a big killer. I might say, if you want a little bit of irony, this guy was killed in July of 48 fighting the Irgun under Begin. This guy's son, Ali Hassan Salameh, became number 2 to Arafat, and he's the one who made the Olympics massacre in 1972, which many of us remember, okay? When Begin becomes the prime minister, he's like this. This is the number 1 on the hit team, and they kill him in 1979, one of those classic cases where he happens to meet a pretty girl, and then in order to make a date with her, they go on a certain street in Lebanon, and the whole street blows up. You see? Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, but the point is, if it's the Middle East, this is the company you keep, okay? So these are the commanders of the Mufti's forces in 1947-48. As we'll see, they were not successful, of course, and they were not super competent either. So their evil intentions were never put out in actual practice, thank God. But their evil intentions were known. That's what I'm trying to say, okay? For its part, the Arab League doesn't trust any of this, and they set up their own army called the Arab Liberation Army, made up of mainly of Muslim volunteers from abroad. You'd be surprised to find that in 1947-48, a lot of the people fighting Israel, Yugoslavians, Bosnia and places like that, there's a lot of, Kosovo, we all know it's bloody there till today. And they're Muslims, and they want to fight Israel. Many of them had been in Hitler's army, because the Mufti, during the Second World War, stayed in Germany and did many things, and one of the things he did was he recruited Muslims in Yugoslavia to join the German army to fight against Tito. You understand? So it's a crazy world. Israel will come across German officers. Also, there's a number of Nazis who escaped the end of the war, and what they did was, this is something that happened many times. The Nazis would go to the Middle East or Yugoslavia places and convert to Muslim, and then the Muslims won't give them away. You understand? If Eichmann would have been smart, this is what he would have done. And then they wouldn't have done away. Some of you know that there were Nazi war criminals in Syria and places like this till they died. So this is what happened over here. The commander over here is Fazi al-Kukchi, who was a famous Arab leader from before. Thank God he was incompetent. And so all this, let's put it this way, all this was to Israel's benefit, you might say. Neither army gets much support from the locals or from anyone else. So they undersupplied. They don't have a lot of help from the local Arab villagers. They get some here and there. We're going to talk about it in a second. They have to operate under certain disadvantages, but they do sneak into the country as the British are pulling out. And nobody says anything about that. In short, the situation was very disorganized and confusing on the Arab side, thank God. And in the war I'm talking about, there were about 800 Arab towns and villages. Only 400 participated in the war. There were 250 Jewish settlements. And as I say before, it's ironic. Half the Palestinians, and more than half, will not participate in the 48-49 war, but you'll get people from Bosnia and Yugoslavia and Khveswas from other places that will. So it's a sort of, they'll travel from far away places just to fight the Jews. Now to the actual sequence of events and the larger question of attacks and reprisals. Because tonight I'm addressing myself to what I call the Arab offensive, and I'm in a very specific time frame over here, which is the day after the UN vote, when the fighting starts, beginning of December of 47, December, January, February, March. That was the period of what you call the Arab offensive on the Jews. There are no large-scale battles at any time during all these years in the 48-49 war. It's just interesting. If you imagine the Israeli War of Independence, like Battle of Gettysburg or somewhere, this army lines up here and that army lines up over there, or even a World War, it didn't happen that way. It's always little skirmishes in little places. It's bloody where it happens, but they're always scattered all over the place. In addition, during this entire period, the British Army is still there. They haven't pulled out. And the British presence until May inhibits either side from coming out fighting and swinging with both hands. The Jews are really frustrated, and properly so, by the British presence, because if the Jews ever bring out a tank, the British will confiscate it, so they have to hide a tank, if they had one. If they ever have like a machine gun, they have to hide it. You understand? So they can't, you can't fight the British, so they're fighting with one hand behind the back. To a certain degree, this is true of the Arabs as well. They will infiltrate the country and they'll make certain raids here and there. But if they ever come out in big force, the British will suppress it and they have to watch out. So it's kind of funny, but it's the beginning of what you and I are familiar with till today. A basic feature of the Middle Eastern conflict is that it's totally political and run by political considerations. Neither side is ever given a chance to totally what it wants to do to the other. Maybe I said that wrong. If the Arabs, God forbid, ever was a win, they probably would let them do it. But if you know and I know from the 67 war and the 48 wars we'll see and the Yom Kippur war, and every time Israel starts making progress, the UN steps in and stops it. You have to, all that means is that is the price of doing business. You can't complain about life. You just have to accommodate yourself to, and that's what Israel has to do. I'll give you an example. They went last time into Gaza, as we all know, right? The war they had recently in Gaza. It is what, if they wanted to go full blast, they could bomb the whole Gaza. But you know and I know, with CNN and everything else, they have to, the generals have to always calculate totally the political side of things. This is true in some way or other back in 1947 as well. That's the point I'm trying to make. The British are conflicted over how to withdraw. Not if it's an all-Jewish town like Tel Aviv, they pull out right away in the beginning of December 1947 because there are no Arabs. There's nothing to talk about. Just give it over to them. If it's an all-Arab place like we saw about before, for example, Shechem or something like that, you go out of there because there's nothing to talk about. But if it's a mixed area of Jews and Arabs, then the question becomes, who gets the local fort? Who gets the police station with the weapons? Who gets the, the trucks and the assets that would make a big difference? If a fight breaks out, then it becomes kind of tricky, okay? All I can say is the British policy is profoundly inconsistent because the British were inconsistent in all this. And those of you who know what I'm talking about, imagine if they would give us Latrun, right? Which they could do as a police fortress on the way to Jerusalem. Later on, so many Jews fought to try to take it and they weren't able to, right? And so you had these kind of things where the goodies are up for grabs. It's a question of who gets it. It's really funny. The British defense minister, the guy in charge of the army at this time, was Jewish. Yeah. Emmanuel Shinwell was a leading member of the British Labour Party. He was not at all, let's go to the next one. That's him. He says, this guy was, it's funny, Bevin was the foreign minister, but he was the war minister, the Secretary of State for War. He was a big macher in the Labour Party. He didn't have much to do with Jews, but he wasn't a self-hating Jew at all. I put this other picture here because they're very famous. Back in Parliament in the 1930s, this guy, you can see his name, Robert Tatton Bower, a real British MP from the Conservative Party, that type. No, it's a real pompous so-and-so. He says to the other guy, they're arguing in Parliament, and he says to this guy, he says, go back to Poland with the rest of the Jews, or something like this. Nobody says any protest. So he walks, this is not done in the British Parliament, but it was done. So he walks across the aisle and decks the guy. Yes. And what do you call it? The Speaker of the House, when the guy gets up, he says, did you see what happened? The Speaker of the House says, I didn't see anything. You see? You see? It's a funny kind of a story. And I remember Winston Churchill said, because he was there when it happened, he says, what do you want from somebody who's a pompous ass who walks like a pregnant turkey, So it's a funny guy who's in charge of the British Army. He's the top official. He's Secretary of State for War. He's above the generals, you understand? He's in the cabinet. He's a funny guy who's in charge of the British Army during this period of disengagement from Palestine. Who needs fiction? The average British soldier is incensed. He's PO'd at the Jews, not the Arabs. But the reason is because the Irgun and the Stern Gang. You understand? If you're British, they've been killing you. I mean, I understand how they feel. If you're a British officer or a soldier, the ones who hated the Jews, okay? They're the ones who put you into the Bevingrads and all that. And that's why from time to time during this period, in December, January, February, March, you'll have some notorious incidents that take place a couple times. For example, this happened a few times in Jerusalem, unfortunately. Haganah Patrol was walking around. The British drove up, arrested them all, took away their weapons, and then threw them in an Arab neighborhood, unarmed. And they were literally pulled apart. You know who you're dealing with. They were literally cut to pieces. And the British. Now, why did the British do that? Usually it's because their gun shot my friend or something like the Stern Gang. And it's a terrible kind of business, okay? What's the result, though? The Irgun hears about this, or the Stern, and they go and shoot up a bunch of other British soldiers, even during this time when the British are pulling out. They blow up of this, that, and the other. And so it's the old Middle East cycle of violence. I repeat, the cycle of violence, which is going to be such a pronounced feature of what we're looking at, in 1947? I think the same thing is true in December of 2011, right? There's an endless cycle of violence. This is the problem. Undirected fighting takes place right away, but it can only take place in the mixed population cities. So, for example, Yerushalayim, Tel Aviv, Yafo, as we mentioned before, Tel Aviv is Jewish, right next door is Yafo, Tiveria, Tzfas, Haifa, all these places, the Arabs will start shooting into the Jewish neighborhoods. Also in the north where the kibbutzim are located, they take pot shots at the kibbutzim. Now, it's not so simple. The Mufti was a fool. And he's the worst thing that ever happened to them. I say the worst thing ever happened to them. By the time I'm done, I think you'll see what I mean. He's the worst thing that ever happened to them. And so he was in charge of something called the Arab Higher Committee. So the day after the United Nations voted for a petition, the Arab Higher Committee says, all the Arabs should make a 3-day strike. Okay, I understand that. But taking down the local level, 3-day strike for the Jews. The Jews, let's go kill them. So the local Arabs themselves get all heated up, and on their own, they start going around Kedarkam, attacking buses and neighborhoods, and it's uncoordinated. It's not part of any kind of a strategy. And then that means that for the Jews, now listen closely, the big question is going to be, in 47, 48, how to hit back. Surgically, or you nuke them. Right? They shoot one guy over here. Do you shoot one guy over there? Or they blow up something here? Is that what you do? Or do you go to the village and destroy it? In other words, it's Parsha Vayishlach that we had today. They raped Dinah, wiped out the whole town. But Yaakov said not. How does that work? It's an old issue. It's thousands of years old. Hachazona Yasez Achosenu, as Shimon and Levi say to their father, they do this to our sister, we kill everybody, right? Or do you say not? Debates rage in the Yishuv leadership during this entire period. There's the moderates, and they want limited and surgical strikes. If you know Abdul living in this town did it, okay, go get him. I don't say after the trial. But not the person standing next to him, and not anyone else. And if you don't know who did it, then don't do anybody, because it doesn't justify taking an innocent life. That's the position of the moderates. Ben Gurion and the Haganah leaders say that's nice in theory, but it's not possible. We don't have this luxury, and instead they say the Jews have to strike back indiscriminately. Okay, and as a matter of security policy, if the Arabs know that you're going to be so weak that you're only going to go after Abdul, and if he runs away, gets away with it, it'll encourage more of them to do it. If you go into town and you kill everybody, the men, women, and children, then Hanisharim Yishmu Biro. Then the other Arabs in the nearby towns won't get involved in these kind of acts. It's a debate. It's not simple. If you tell me, one side is wrong, one side is wrong, it's not a simple matter over here. On the other hand, indiscriminate Jewish raids will radicalize many Arabs and make them more eager to join the fight. So maybe you should not do that in order to encourage more peace-type Arabs and more moderate ones to stay out. After all, if you kill somebody's brother or cousin, then they're going to get in. And so this is basically a problem that's existential. We have it today. This is a security issue that Israel has today, except now, with Al Jazeera and CNN, you have a lot less because of political and PR purposes of this indiscriminate kind of striking. Believe me, Israel has to be super duper surgical, and that's why Ariel Sharon came up with what they call the targeted assassination, because then, okay, you can do it. But Israel is a high-tech country today, as you know, one of the most high-tech, and they actually have the kind of tech that can do that, where they can find out where somebody specific is living and take him out, and not the person standing to the right and the left. This was not part of the world of 1947-48, so it's a cruel and bloody business. And believe me, the fight between Israel and the Arabs, as you're going to see over here, is that the Arab minhag of torturing prisoners and mutilating the bodies, which is what they do, infuriates and hardens the Jews. It demonizes the Arabs in their mind and convinces the Jews that the Arabs are animals and they deserve symmetrically brutal treatment. And the Arabs don't get it. They just do what they do. And so they'll scream and they'll rejoice over cutting bodies up and all the rest. All they're doing is getting the Jews so heated up. Jews say, we're going to kill everybody over here. And it's more cycle of violence. This is the basic feature of the time. The 1947-49 war, as is usually the case with ethnic conflicts, will therefore feature a lot of massacres by both sides. That's just the truth. A lot of massacres by both sides. A lot of killing of POWs by both sides. Israel doesn't have a POW camp until like July of 1948. The Arabs, I don't know if they ever did, maybe the Jordanians, but that's it. And therefore, this is just the reality. They capture a side, they shoot all the guys. They're prisoners. What are you going to do with them? They're going to let them go. This is what they do. It's a cruel business. There's expulsions and ethnic cleansings by both sides. Whenever the Arabs will take over an area, they'll kill every Jew or drive them away and destroy it with a shul or anything, knock it down and remove all traces. But the Jews will do the same thing. Okay? The only problem is Jews are better at it. That's why the Arabs were stupid for adopting this policy, because they didn't have an organized army and the Jews do. That in one sentence is what happens in the 1947 and 48 war. Let me give you one example of many over here. I just pulled this out the other day from a new book out on it. Listen closely and you'll see what I mean by the cycle of violence. It'll take me like 2-3 minutes or so to read this, but it's an example of what goes on all the time during these months. Like most intercommunal wars, this one was marked by cycles of revenge. On the morning of December 30th, 1947, an Irgun squad threw bombs from a passing van into a crowd of casual Arab laborers at a bus stop outside the Haifa oil refinery, killing 11 Arabs and wounding dozens. In a spontaneous response from inside the plant, the Arab refinery employees used sticks, metal bars, stones, etc., turned on the Jewish co-workers, mostly white-collar employees, and in an hour-long rampage, butchered 39 and wounded another 50. Several employers protected the Jews until the British showed up, and so on and so forth. The subsequent investigation showed that the massacre was spontaneous and triggered by the Irgun attack, and that the Arabs had not planned it. But the Haganah High Command felt that the massacre cannot go unpunished, whatever its trigger, and they targeted a large Arab village called Balad al-Sheikh and its satellite villages Hawassa, southeast of Haifa. Many of the refinery workers worked there, and a secret report named 3 villagers who were participating in the massacre. On the night of 31 December, so that's a day later, right? And the January 1st, on that night, the Haganah sent in a Palmach company and several independent platoons. Their orders were to kill as many men as possible, or alternatively, 100 men, and destroy furniture but avoid women and children. The raiders went from house to house, pulling out men and shooting them. Sometimes they threw hand grenades into the houses and sprayed the interiors with automatic fire. There were several dozen dead, including, of course, women and children. During the raid, nearby British and Arab Legion units fired from far at the raiders. The Haganah suffered 3 dead. The Mapam leaders, and the Mapam is the party that most of the Palmach soldiers are from, they criticized the indiscriminate nature of the retaliation. Ben-Gurion responded that to discriminate in such circumstances is impossible. We are at war. There is an injustice in this, but otherwise we will not be able to hold out. I mean, there you have it. I'll even do a little more. A second revenge strike cycle occurred in eastern Galil. That's the part near Tzfat, right? He says, on December 2nd, 1948, several Arabs attacked a Jewish guard buying cigarettes in an Arab village of Chisas at the tip of the Panhandle, all the way up north. The guard shot one of them dead. In other words, a bunch of Arabs attacked him. He pulled and shot one of the Arabs. The British arrested the guard, but local villagers began shooting at the Jews in nearby fields. On December 18th, which is 2 weeks later, a group of Arabs ambushed and shot dead a Jewish cart driver at Kibbutz Mayan Baruch. The local Palmach contingent requested permission to retaliate against Chisas and other villages. Local Jewish leaders led by Nachum Hurwitz from the Hashomer opposed the idea, saying the area was quiet. But the commander of the Palmach, Yigal Alon, approved of reprisal, and that night they hit the town and a nearby mansion. They stormed the house, killing 3 men, a woman, 4 children, blew up the house, also damaging a nearby building, killed 4 men. None of the dead involved in the death of the car driver, and then the Arab village flees. They're so scared from the whole thing, they run away into Syria, okay? The raid triggered a protracted dispute among the Yeshuv's political leaders. A few, backed by the Arab experts, condemned the raid, saying it spread the fire. Yosef Sapir, who was in the Liberal Party, called for severe punishment of the Palmach officers. Ezra Danin, on the other hand, was from the head of the Mossad, you might say at that time, said, the Haganah does whatever it does and doesn't ask our advice. No one was punished, but the Arabs bent on revenge, and therefore on the 9th of January, a week later, a couple hundred Bedouin from Syria, directed by the guy whose family was killed, attacked Kibbutz Kfar Zold on the Syrian border. They were driven off, but only, after so-and-so were killed here on this side. What is that? Yeah, that's what I mean by cycle of violence, except that now I gave it a face. Who's right and who's wrong? Is anybody wearing the white hats, anybody wearing the black? It depends who you are. Okay. On the other hand, keep in mind, the Jews didn't win a fight. I repeat, they did not want a fight. If they say like this, okay, it'll be an Arab state and a Jewish state, that's one. But if you're coming to make a war, so then it's like this, we will, like Shylock said, we'll better the instruction. So it's it's a complicated kind of business to say the least. Katamon. Maybe some people have relatives living in Katamon, Arab village. On the night of, in the Arab neighborhood in Yerushalayim, of course. The night of 5th, 6th January, a squad of sappers, meaning Palmach guys, penetrated the Katamon, West Jerusalem's Katamon neighborhood and blew up the Semiramis Hotel because it was suspected as being the headquarters of the Arab fighters. 26 Arab civilians were killed, plus a diplomat. The explosion triggered the start of a panic exodus from this prosperous Arab neighborhood. And later on, they described that one of the two dead were irregulars. What's my point? Ben Gurion and the others start to say like this. If we hit them, they run away. Yeah, it's interesting. You see? Is that right? Is it wrong that, okay? That is exactly what goes on. So what I'm trying to tell you in short is there are a lot of Dir Yassin situations. They got a lot of play, as we all know, and that happens in April, so that's not something I'm talking about tonight. But the exact debate and controversy of Dir Yassin is precisely over whether the Arabs were killed over there in cold blood or in hot blood. Was it in a battle or not? So these kind of fights went on, whatever you want to call it, all the time. It's funny to me always how some things, get publicity and don't. The successful efforts of the Jewish forces is what prevents even more of them being perpetrated on Jewish settlements. That's a fact. It's not the humanitarianism of, Hassan Salameh or something like that, which doesn't exist, or the Grand Mufti's guys. And so it's stupid on the part of the Arabs because they're not well as organized for this killing thing as the Jews are. But they're just coming from their culture, which is, just come out and kill. In mixed cities, like Yerushalayim, Tel Aviv Yafo, Haifa, and so forth, is a similar cycle of violence. The Arabs and British collaborators who helped the Arabs, British soldiers who helped the Arabs, will set off bombs in Jewish areas. I'll show you in a second. Rehov Yafo, we all know this. Ben Yehuda, we all know that. And most impressively, I don't know how they did it. Notice they used an Arab who was a janitor, you'll see in a second, put a bomb in the Sachnut building on King George. That was the headquarters of the Jewish state at that time. You know what I'm talking about. The Jewish agency building, the Kremlin, right? That we all know I'm talking, that's the big area, which at that time was the headquarters of the Jewish government, at least the official Zionist organization. So how'd they get into the White House, so to speak? But they did do it, and they set up a big bomb over there, and they killed all kind of people. I'm talking about next to Rechavia. Let's take a look at this little piece over here.
In Jerusalem, the battle was also developing. On the 22nd of February, there was a major explosion on Ben Yehuda Street. 47 Jews were killed, 130 were wounded. The Jews were furious. They suspected the involvement of deserters from the British Army, helping the Arabs plant the bomb. On the 11th of March, there was yet another explosion, this one at the Jewish Agency building in the centre of Jerusalem, effectively the seat of Jewish government. A car filled with explosives was left at the entrance by a previously trusted Arab employee of the United States consulate. The explosion killed 12 Jews.
So these are two examples of many. That's my point. And same thing will happen in Haifa, same thing will happen in other areas. But I tell you again, it's kind of funny because where's your calculus of violence? If you do it to me, I can do it to you. Maybe I'll be better at it. And that's what happens. And so there are civilian casualties, obviously, on both sides, obviously. But the Haganah, and the Irgun especially, will do the same to the Arab areas and cities, and it'll be a lot worse for the Arabs. And here's the psychological reason why. The Palestinians in 47, 48 do not develop and display an attitude of stand fast that the Jews had at that time. One of the most interesting aspects of this whole period, to me and others, is psychological. Today, we're all scared about Israel, and properly so. And when you're in Israel, Israelis are scared, many of them, properly so. They weren't scared in 48. I'm sure somewhere, you know what I mean. But the leadership, they said, "Guys, we can take this. We can beat them." They call it in Israel the spirit of 48. Even though the odds were much worse and they had less weapons, all the rest of it, but psychologically it wasn't there. So if they blow up a Jewish neighborhood, the Jews say, "Guys, carry on." But if the Haganah or the Irgun blows up an Arab neighborhood, they freak out and run away. This is what happens. Because they weren't psychologically prepared for a war. As I tried to explain last week at the beginning of tonight, many of them didn't want this whole thing in the first place. And if you're trying to live a regular life and bombs go off in a school or in a shopping center or in a shuk or something like that, you run away. And the Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, will panic and flee. So bottom line is, if a bomb is set off in Rehov Yafo, Jews are killed, but the survivors become more resolute. On the other hand, if a bomb goes off in Silwan, hundreds of survivors more will leave town. So ultimately, the mutual urban terrorism comes out as a plus for the Jews and a minus for the Arabs. It's funny. This is quickly grasped by Ezra Danin, who's the head of the Shai, of the Mossad at that time, as you call it. And he and Ben Gurion, they said, like I told you before, it will eventually gel into Israeli policy. I know how to get the Arabs out of Katamon, bomb them, right? They bomb us. I know how to get the Arabs out of Yafo or something, bomb them. Put a bomb in their thing. And it works. See, it's like a terrible calculus. You understand? And eventually, Ben Gurion's thinking will lead to, in retaliation for this attack, will go in and destroy the village and drive out or kill the inhabitants and move Jews in. And then you won't have to worry about the village anymore. That's what they eventually call transfer. This is a very hot topic, as you know, among the new historians, all the rest. But all this happened, except it happened on both sides. You see? Typically, the Israeli historians will say, I guess, the Arabs did this, this, and this. And the Arabs will say, the Jews did this and this. And neither one wants to say what they did. Will the British permit this? After all, they're in charge. I told you before, both the Jews and the Arabs will be inhibited by the presence of the British, and they'll plan the way. On May 15th, the British leave. Then we really take out everything and go after each side. In general, Ben Gurion during this period, in December, January, February, March, lays down a policy. Every kibbutz was hold till relieved. We don't abandon any posts even if they get killed. That's what he said. You see? That's a tall order. He's in Tel Aviv giving orders, and we're talking about a bunch of kibbutzim, especially in the north, but most places. And we noticed when we visit Israel today, the kibbutzim were located amidst whole Arab areas. You get it? There's one or two Israeli kibbutzim, Jewish kibbutzim, and there's 1,000 Arab villages all over the place. This is the reality. And so they're being attacked or shot at or this and that, and Ben Gurion said, I guess, you must hold under all circumstances. And that's why during this period of 47, 48, 49, most of the kibbutzim in Israel and moshavim, that kind of thing, are in a state of siege. There will be many attacks by Arabs on the kibbutzim and moshavim, and sometimes it ends up with fighting hand to hand. If you go to the case, I don't have the time tonight. I'd love to, but I don't have the time to give you detail after detail after detail. I'm trying to share with you the barest of the details over here. But sometimes you go to Israel, we went to Yad Mordechai on our trip last time, hand-to-hand fighting. You see, that's what it came down to. And that's why when you go there today, they said this is the finest hour. They always, and many of these kibbutzim, what I'm talking about, they still have the bombed out buildings from 47, 48, and a gun still showing prominently and things like this, because this is when they had to be on the line. As a result, during this period, the kibbutzim and moshavim fortify like crazy. That's the reason they beat back the attacks, one of the reasons. In the December-May period, such as the famous attack by Kauchji's Arab Liberation Army on Tirat Tzvi, which is, is a religious kibbutz. Right? I'm sure there are people here who've been there. Mizrahi kibbutz. It's not exactly, the 15th Division or something like that, but they beat back the Arab attack with a lot of casualties. It's just interesting. But you believe me, when the partition came in, the others, they immediately dig, and fortify, and that's what you got to do during these times. The Arabs claimed the attack as a victory, and they conquered the kibbutz. But fortunately, it was a lie, and the Jews said, let them keep lying. There's only one exception. During this time, only one kibbutz, you might say, or a Jewish settlement will be evacuated in the Arab territory. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? No, they are not evacuated. They're wiped out. No. Ben Shemen, does anybody know what I'm talking about? This was a youth Aliyah village. These are kids from the Holocaust. Said it. Ben Gurion said, I guess we can't afford that. let's go to the next one. Here's here.
This is the youth village of Ben Shemen, located near the Arab city of Lod and outside the Jewish state according to the United Nations partition plan. This film, shown here for the first time, was taken by one of the teachers of Ben Shemen and sat in a desk drawer for 50 years. The youngsters were mainly survivors of the Holocaust. British soldiers, together with Haganah guards, accompanied the youngsters. They travelled to Kfar Viti, a village in Jewish-held territory on the Mediterranean coast, where they hoped they would find safety.
See, because, that was not something they wanted to take a chance with. But everybody else, you stand where you are. Hold till relieved. Believe me, it was a tough order to keep. You understand? If you're right in the middle of the whole Arab territory, it's a tough order to keep. And so, sometimes the urban fighting during this period gets crazy hot, and then it gets cold again. For example, and again, I'll read you very briefly over here. First organized Arab urban attack was launched against Hatikva quarter. We all know where this is, Tel Aviv. Am I right? You all know what I'm talking about? Hatikva quarter on the eastern edge of Tel Aviv. Following several days of sniping, the Haganah hit them back and blew up a house. And then on 8th December, hundreds of Arab irregulars, led by Hassan Salome, attacked the Hatikva quarter. Whoa! In other words, a whole mob comes of fighters from next door, from Yaffo, to attack in Tel Aviv. And so the city became a Mamsha war zone. The Haganah resisted fiercely. A few of the quarter's houses fell as British troops looked on. So the Arabs capture towns. The Arabs looted and burned them. Then Haganah reinforcements arrived, infiltrating the British patrol, and the Arabs retreated. The Arabs suffered 60 dead, the Jews, a number of other dead. And then later on, a British officer returned a Jewish baby that had been abducted during the attack, and so on and so forth. You have the same thing, a second attack 2 months later in Yerushalayim. The attackers ran the risk of British interference. Where'd it go? From Yamin Moshe. There's a huge Arab attack. I mean, you know and I know where these places are. That's the reason I mentioned it to you, right? That's where the windmill is, okay? So you understand, the Arabs come out from the old city, they come across an attack, it's a major attack. It's right next to Rehavia. It's right next to the hotel that you stay in. You understand? It was up close and personal. And so you understand that the Jews are like freaked out, and you will understand that they'll say like this, we're going to play hardball. Okay, so in January, February moves on. Kochi, this other guy, and similar groups move into the mandated territories. The British don't stop them. They move into the Arab part, so it doesn't matter, and nobody knows who these territories will go to after May the 5th. They attack a bunch of kibbutzim, as I said before, Yechiam and Tirat Tzvi. That's what's going on in January and February of 1948. The British are not interfering, but the kibbutzim are tough, fortified, and they hold out, although there's casualties on both sides. As January and February unfold, the Arabs aren't totally stupid. They say, wait a minute, this situation isn't so great. Urban fighting is not working out so well. Assaulting the kibbutzim is not working out so well. Stam terrorism with Jewish counterterrorism is not working out so well. What do you do? And the answer they come up with, which is an intelligent one, is choke off the roads. You get it? After all, you don't have to fight neighborhood by neighborhood in Yerushalayim. Cut off Yerushalayim from reinforcements and supplies and food, and they'll die. They'll surrender. They'll be massacred, whatever the case is. That's a militarily sound kind of thing. You don't have to go fight house to house like Stalingrad. Surround the place and cut off the supplies, okay? There the advantage lies with the Arabs because they are in the villages around the cities. The roads in Israel, especially Tel Aviv to Lud, and you and I know the road to Yerushalayim, even the improved road to Yerushalayim is crazy with the twists and the turns through the mountains. The old roads went really through lousy territory, and it goes through many areas in which it's a valley surrounded by hills, so you can shoot down on them. So it's ideal for these kinds of purposes. It makes sense, and this is when the Etzion block, Gush Etzion, is attacked. They're cut off. They're south. You all know where Gush Etzion is. They're south of Yerushalayim, and all you have to do is cut off the road. The Jews, very famously, on one occasion, they make a big deal in Israel called the 35, when a whole group of students, drafted into Haganah, try to go and bring reinforcements and supplies to Gush Etzion. It's not that far. Would you agree? I mean, you can walk it. It's not that far from Yerushalayim, but it's right through the Arab territory. And it's very famous. They meet an Arab. They do not kill him. Therefore, he then tells on them, and then they all get wiped out by the local Arab villagers, which Ben Gurion said, I guess, see, if they would have killed him, it wouldn't happen. So you go back to that kind of thing there, okay? All during this period, the Jews use the Palmach. Ben Gurion uses the Palmach as the fire brigade. If there's a major crisis over here, they send the Palmach over there. The Palmach is originally 3,000, expanded to 6,000. 6,000 can't handle all this, right? They start taking losses right and left. I had a movie I wanted to show you, but I wasn't able to do it tonight. They had like maybe I'll find it next week. When Nelson gets back from Israel, they had like a Woodstock. I kid you not. But in the middle of 47, summer of 47, not from, of course, all the youth from the kibbutzim and that kind of thing all get together, have some kind of music festival at a certain kibbutz. And the guy said, I guess, most of those kids are dead within a year. Because those are exactly the ones that fight in the Palmach and the original Haganah formations. And so it's used piecemeal. There's a bunch of Arab villages attacking here. The Palmach has to go and shoot at them until the trucks can get through. And they get killed. And it is what it is. Yerushalayim, of course, is a natural target. Yerushalayim is in the middle of the country. It's not supposed to be part of Israel. The partition plan was, and that's the official position of the United States government today, I repeat, the official position of the United States government, which is that Yerushalayim's status has never been settled because the partition called for the lines that we saw at the beginning. And Jerusalem was to be internationalized and run by a United Nations commissioner who will have a UN army over there and keep the peace, And, can you just imagine that? And the Swedes should be in charge of Jerusalem. The Indians and the Iranians. But this was the plan. Now, it so happens that Israel's weird. All the Jews live here. 100,000 Jews live in Yerushalayim. Many of whom are from, and therefore aren't even part of the fight either, any more than most of the Arabs were part of the fight. And so, what do? How do you keep 100,000 supplied? They're always on the verge of starvation. Do we have the partition map again? Yeah. You see what I mean, right? Here's the Jewish part. Here's Jerusalem. It's in the middle of the Arab part. The UN plan was, because after all, Jerusalem is holy to all three faiths. It should be kept even Steven, that they should be open, to everybody, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, like the UN was going to do. But this was the plan. And the result is that they're far away from the other Jews. In order to bring supplies from Tel Aviv, you got to go, as you see on the map, down to here. It's all through the Arab stuff. Okay? And Abdul Qadir al-Husseini knows the tough Arab stuff, and they're all in villages and hills, and they will roast you and cut you to pieces, and they love to do it. And that's what the Jews have to do. The Jews try to... last time I was in Israel with a tour, we went to one place called Neve Ilan. Have you ever been there? It's a kibbutz, originally, now it's upscale. It's a kibbutz that was originally founded in 1946. Too little, too late. But Ben Gurion said, we better have some Jewish settlements on the way between the Jewish part and Jerusalem. Otherwise, we go totally through Arab territory. And so it's above one of the roads. But they themselves fight like crazy in 47, 48. They barely stay alive. You understand? And afterwards, Ben Gurion said, we should have done this 20 years ago. We should have made 20. We can have made yeah, would have, could have, should have. And I'm not... listen, when you're a historian, you get to beat up on dead people. But, the fact is they made a mistake, and now they had to pay the price because they're going through all the Arab territory over here. As the Jews can only develop countermeasures. This is when they start the migunim, which is a big part of Israel today. The armored cars, so maybe the Arab shoot at you, but you can get through anyway. And what's the armored cars? Two things of metal with gravel in the middle. We're not talking about high tech over here. But that's what Israel could do in 47, or the Jews could do in 47. As February and March go by, the situation deteriorates for the Jews in the sense of their inability to relieve the siege of Jerusalem and to prevent lethal and costly attacks on the roads and highways. Whole convoys fail to get through. They get all killed. Whole convoys get stuck, and some have to turn back. It happens sometimes. And Yerushalayim is always 10 days away from starvation. You see? That's the situation. It's really rough. It was a very smart move on the part of the Arabs. The Palmach struggles desperately to get a few food convoys through, but Yerushalayim is always close to starvation and massacre. It's just what it is. A lot of these Palmach guys get killed in these battles for Castel and the other mountain and this thing and that thing to try to hold temporarily for a couple hours so that the trucks can get in, or hold a couple hours so the trucks can get out. I mean, that's what all these battles are, which is why they're counterintuitive from a military point of view, and they're going to change radically in April. which is not something I'm going to do tonight. We're near the end. Time out for the wars of the Jews. I told you I was going to tell you another story before. Shoshi Kruger, her husband, told me that she had a grandfather. I hope I get the story right. She had a grandfather who was in the Palmach driving one of these trucks. And a tough guy. You can think of what it takes to drive one of these trucks. And he's driving and shooting at the same time. And the convoy gets to Jerusalem Friday evening after all the fighting, 3 hours after Shabbos. He gets attacked by the Naturkarta. Not only did they cuss him out, but they burned the truck. So you might tell me like this: you don't believe the story? It's in the Gemara. Some people know what I'm talking about. During the siege of Jerusalem, 3 groups. Some had wood. So if you have trouble believing that story, I just told you one from 1947, 48. Okay, time out for the wars with the Jews. Back to the wars of the Jews and the Arabs. As I say before, this is the months in which the Palmach paid the highest price to keep the lines through. And if you go, some of you I imagine have been in Tel Aviv, the Palmach Museum, as they call it. It's recent, very high tech, all the rest of it. And in the front they have the famous poem by one Israeli poet, Magash HaKesef, where he says, the state was given to you, the younger generation, on a silver platter. They say, we're the silver platter, because a lot of people got killed. Palmach is a very funny thing. They're super anti-frum. These are left-wing, very ideological kids from the kibbutzim who really, really, really been brainwashed against the religious, but not the commander. Now you go, alone his mother was religious. And she died young. It's a whole interesting story. There's the Bnei Akiva is part of the Palmach. Not a large part, and he's very sensitive to that. It's a very interesting story. But these are the soldiers who become the officers, and later on, in 48 and 49, they'll become the very anti-religious officers in the Israeli army, so much so that when they see the new recruits coming in from overseas, they cut off the payas, cut off the beard, and Ben Gurion will then go crazy. He says, that's all we need. We have enough trouble fighting the Arabs. They get enough trouble with Jews. And he will bring in Rabbi Goren, to try to create an army chaplaincy, primarily originally for the purpose not of spreading Yiddishkeit in the army, but of sensitizing the Israeli officer corps to the religious and cultural needs of this particular subset of soldiers. It's okay. It's a work in progress. Now, all joking aside, as far as I know, I've said this a number of times, the Israeli army is the only kehillah left in the world. Long ago, they used to have Jewish autonomous coercive communities everywhere. And when you have an autonomous community, for centuries, in the time of the Rishonim, the Achronim, until 200 years ago, I've spoken about this in the past. And ever since then, the state has deprived the Jewish community, like other religious communities, of their coercive powers. For better or worse, I don't think it's a bad idea. But therefore, we find ourselves today that I'm living in Baltimore and so are you, and this one can be Orthodox, this one can conservative, this can be this, that, and the other, and one has no power to do anything over the other, and therefore we don't have to accommodate to each other, and therefore we all live side by side, but we don't communicate. So Baltimore, Maryland is a very good example of that. There's 100,000 Jews who don't talk to each other. And that's part of modernity. The only place that doesn't apply is the Israeli army. You have a squad, they have to make it work out. It's very interesting. There's a whole genre, I don't get too off on this, a whole genre of what we call She'elot Utshuvot from the Israeli army, from the Tzahal. The whole bunch of books coming out all the time. And these are by army rabbis and things like this, which they have real army questions. And basically, you don't have the luxury of saying, doing this thing or that thing. You got to work it out. You understand? And Shlomo Zalman and many great poskim were involved always, and they used to send them the shilas. I'll just give you one example before getting too bogged down in all this. What do you do if I'm a soldier and the Torah, and it's my turn to serve the food? They take a Torah, they take a rotation. So now I serve the food. According to Shulchan Aruch, you're not allowed to give a Jew food if you know he's not going to make a bracha. It's a clear din in the Gemara. Understand? So what do you do? And you'll see Rosh Hashanah, Reb Zoltan, they say give him the food, and they come up with this reason or that reason. It's very because you got to make it work. You can't say I'm not going to give you food. Understand? That's a little stupid example of what's a much wider kind of area. But anyway, by the beginning of April, the British are 3/4 gone. Coming near the end now, giving the Jews a slightly more open window, but only a slightly more open window the Jews perceive that their situation is deteriorating. Yerushalayim will fall. The Galilee kibbutzim will fall because the Arab stranglehold on the roads. You can't get supplies to the kibbutzim and the moshavim up in the north, especially the ones that are on the other side of the Galilee. And it is what it is. The new state is going to have gigantic crises. They're a month and a half away from proclaiming statehood. If it's proclaimed on May 15th, which is, we'll see next week, was by no means a done deal. Ben-Gurion and his guys determined that the Palestinian Arab offensive, which has come to express itself, trial and error, in strangling of roads, must be countered by a massive, coordinated Jewish offensive for the first time. An offensive aimed at crushing all the Arab forces facing the Jews, conquering all the Arab territory necessary for securing Jewish contiguity. In short, a war of limited but definite conquest. Okay? And here are Ben-Gurion's generals. These are the decision makers, whatever they tell you, anywhere else. And they